last one.
Refuge, which is superior to wrong paths, and bodhicitta, which is superior to the inferior paths, are both qualities that we must develop. So both are Buddhist concepts, but refuge is a Buddhist concept common to Hinayana and Mahayana. So refuge is something that we all accept, that is to say. Now, without refuge, we cannot develop bodhicitta. Without refuge, we cannot achieve the omniscience of Buddhahood. So, from a Mahayana perspective, we take refuge in the three jewels. Of course, that's common to all. And the Buddha jewel is posited as the omniscience, or the Buddhahood, really, which includes the omniscience of Buddhahood, which we aspire towards. Bodhicitta is said to be superior to inferior paths. Now, from a Mahayana perspective, the paths of hearers and solitary realizers are considered inferior, and thus the development of bodhicitta is superior to their paths. Actually, if you notice that Geshe is speaking too fast, feel free to turn on your news and interrupt him to slow him down. That can be helpful. Anyway, I joke. Bodhicitta is not something we can generate by going about some sort of worldly activity in this life. It's such a precious and profound mind that it requires hearing, contemplation, and meditation inseparably, not only day to day, but throughout lifetimes to achieve. Without meditating on it for a very long time, it's very difficult to give rise to bodhicitta. If you simply read about bodhicitta or just explain it, it's very difficult to say that you can give rise to it in that way. It is something you give rise to through practice. So I've explained a lot about bodhicitta in the classes up until now, and you are all practitioners of this mind who wish to give rise to it. So there's a little bit left to say about bodhicitta, which is the difference between aspiring bodhicitta and engaging bodhicitta. And of course, Shantideva in his Bodhisattva's way of life made explicit the difference between these two. So aspiring bodhicitta is essentially merely the wish to achieve Buddhahood for all mother sentient beings. You can put it down to just that. This noble thought, if I could only achieve Buddhahood for all sentient beings. Engaging bodhicitta is that plus action. So on top of having the thought, may I achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, I will do that. It is the engagement in bodhisattva deeds until one achieves Buddhahood. So I am going to practice the 6 perfections until I achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. One can say that that is engaging bodhicitta. So Shantideva famously says in verse 16 of his Bodhisattva's Way, as corresponding to the wish to go and then to setting out, the wise should understand respectively the difference that divides these two. So he gives the analogy of a wishing to go outside. That's like aspiring bodhicitta. Then actually stepping out, right, going outside, that is engaging bodhicitta. So there's an idea of maintaining the commitment of aspiring bodhicitta. So aspiring bodhicitta is, as we said, the wish to achieve Buddhahood for all sentient beings. And holding the commitment to that is the thought, I will not let go of this mind until I achieve Buddhahood. So that is the commitment to aspiring. I wasn't just muted when I gave that explanation. Sorry if I was. So you'll see in the outline of the Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path, there's a whole section on um, upholding bodhicitta through the ritual, right? And there's the ritual as presented in the Bodhisattva levels, commentary, and so on and so forth. So there are multiple rituals for generating this commitment. So with respect to engaging bodhicitta, when you make the firm commitment that I will train in the six perfections until I achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all mother sentient beings, you've given rise to engaging bodhicitta, and at that time, you've taken upon yourself the bodhisattva vows, right? The engaging vows, as they're called. And I clarified this with Geshe, like when you give rise to that mind, is at that point you give rise to the vows too. And he said, yes. So of course we don't have time to go over all of the bodhisattva vows, such as the 18 root downfalls and the 46 branches. Unfortunately, we can't do that. So we'll move back to Essence of Refined Gold. The last class we covered the practices or precepts we uphold so that bodhicitta that we have given rise to does not degenerate in this lifetime. And today we're going to cover the precepts to uphold so that it does not degenerate in future lifetimes. We talked about the degeneration of bodhicitta in the last class, and I said how bodhisattvas on the smaller level of the path of accumulation can fall from their commitment. So it's interesting to think what type of bodhisattvas might degenerate from their commitment. Well, it's asserted that those bodhisattvas who give rise to bodhicitta by way of the sevenfold cause and effect instructions, since they are referred to as beings of inferior faculty, not as intelligent, they are the ones who are posited as the examples of ones who will decline potentially in their commitment. Whereas those bodhisattvas who have given rise to bodhicitta by way of the practice of equalizing and exchanging self with others, because they are of sharper faculties, they're considered to not decline from bodhicitta for that reason. So what is the process by which a bodhisattva declines or falls from their commitment? Well, they think about how difficult and long the road is to Buddhahood and for how many eons they have to spend accumulating merit, right? 3 great countless eons. And they think, I can't do this, it's too much. And then they fall to the Hinayana paths, right? Remaining Buddhists, they enter the lower paths. The main cause for the degeneration of their commitment is not attachment or hatred necessarily. It is said to be their unwillingness to bear or accept the bodhisattva deeds, in particular, the thought of giving away one's body, right? They consider it too hard, too much to ask, and thus they fall from their commitment. So let's return to the text, otherwise we'll never finish it. So page 24 of Essence of Refined Gold. It is a few paragraphs down. This reads, the cause of not losing the power of bodhicitta in future lives arises from the practice of abandoning the 4 harmful dharmas and relying upon the 4 constructive dharmas. So it's quite straightforward. If we generate bodhicitta in this life, we need to make sure that it increases during our future lives and doesn't suddenly decline. And the causes for this are to abandon these 4 black activities, literally translated, and adopting the 4 white activities. So the first harmful dharma or black activity is lying or deceiving your abbot, teacher, or any worthy being. So this is a spiritual teacher, a lama, etc. It says, do not lie to them or deceive them, right? That's straightforward. The opponent force to this harmful dharma is to not speak falsely to any sentient being whatsoever, neither in jest nor even to save your life. So that is the measure of abandoning this black dharma, black activity. It's to think, even at the cost of my life, I will not speak falsely to anyone.
Mm.
Lying is an activity that is bereft of dharma. So lying is something that everyone considers bad, right? Because we know that it leads to a lack of trust or a lack of respect in the person who is telling lies. Deceiving or tricking people is even worse, right? And just like lying, we know the disadvantages that come from tricking other people, right? Nobody likes deceivers. Second harmful dharma is causing others to regret the virtuous actions they have done. So, for example, let's say someone made a donation to a dharma project, and then you come along and tell them, it's such a waste of money. Uh, don't bother. And then because you've said that to them, they then change their mind about their virtuous donation. They think, oh, he's right, what's the point? I shouldn't have made that contribution. I'm not going to again. Right? Changing someone's mind like that is the harmful dharma that they're talking about here, and that should never be done. So never do this to someone. And then it says the antidote to this, the opponent force rather, is to direct anyone to whom gives spiritual instructions towards the Mahayana. So if this person is someone who follows Hinayana Dharma, then they are to be redirected to the Mahayana, right? So redirect them to thoughts of great compassion, bodhicitta, and a wish to achieve the omniscience of Buddhahood. So normally, if you regret virtue, that is non-virtue, non-virtuous. Likewise, if you regret your non-virtue, that is considered virtuous. For example, if you do something that's good and then later you think, I just wasted my time, you've committed non-virtue. Likewise, if you reflect on your action of being mean to someone or causing someone to get angry, right, and you regret that, that regret is a virtue. So we move on to number 3. The third harmful dharma is speaking harshly and angrily to someone who is a bodhisattva. So this also extends to criticizing dharma teachers, right? I think of Devadatta, the relative of the Buddha who is always criticizing him, right? Behaving like that. So the antidote to this is to recognize all Mahayana practitioners as teachers, and when the occasion presents itself, to praise their good qualities. Also train yourself to see all living beings as pure and noble. So essentially, it's to change your view towards otherwise ordinary people and put them higher up in your perspective and offer them respect and so forth. Importantly, it says also train yourself to see all living beings as pure and noble, right? So we don't do this normally. We also never analyze our own faults, but we're more than happy to look at the faults of others, right? However, we should not be searching for others' faults. And if we do see them, we shouldn't dwell on them or point them out. We should let them go and consider it your own fault for looking for their faults, for example. So it's just looking at the translation of the next one. Number 4 is translated as being hypocritical and false with sentient beings. And this word, yogyu in Tibetan, is a little bit difficult to capture. But Um, yeah, it's also translated as being sinister and guile and deceiving others, being cunning, right? It covers all of these. And I think the point is that it leads to people turning against each other, right? It's this type of sinister behavior that aims to split people or groups of people apart. So Geshe said, this type of deception is insidious and terrible, right? It splits up families, it splits up partners, and it, you know,
Mm.
one can even split up the Sangha. So instead of being sinister and cunning, one should aim to be altruistic and think of bringing people together rather than splitting them apart. So Je Rinpoche said, reading down, development of bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, is the central pillar of Mahayana practice, the foundation of the bodhisattva activities, an elixir producing the gold of merit and wisdom, a mind holding the infinite varieties of goodness. Knowing this, the courageous children of the Buddhas hold it tightly at the center of their hearts. So Geshe said he has already explained this. There's no need to go over that verse or those verses again. So we'll continue to read down. The above is the training known as aspiring bodhicitta. Someone may ask, is this discipline sufficient? The answer is no. You should also practice engaging bodhicitta. Take the bodhisattva vows and train in the vast activities of a bodhisattva, the 6 perfections to ripen your own continuum, and the 4 ways of positively influencing others, or the 4 means of attracting disciples, so as to ripen others' minds. So essentially, one might think, well, I've given rise to aspirational bodhicitta. Can I stop there? Can I just keep aspirational bodhicitta in my mind and that's enough? No, it's not enough. So, although we've just covered the practices of not letting aspirational bodhicitta decline in this lifetime nor in future lifetimes by looking at the 4 white and 4 black dharmas and so forth, it's still not enough. One needs to engage in the trainings of the 6 perfections, the bodhisattva deeds. Not only that, Essence of Refined Gold says that we need to train in the 4 means of gathering disciples to ripen others. So, in regards to this, in the Lam Rim Chemo, right, the great treatise of the stages of the path, these perfections and trainings are all taken from Maitreya's ornament for clear realization. And likewise, the 10 perfections are taken from Chandrakirti's Entering the Middle Way, right? Which presents the 6 that we know plus the extra 4 skillful means, aspiration, power, and exalted wisdom. So now in this context, bodhicitta is referring to engaging bodhicitta, and now it talks about how to train in engaging bodhicitta, right? The trainings are the 6 perfections. So what is a perfection? Likewise, what is the difference, for example, between generosity and the perfection of generosity, or ethics and the perfection of ethics? Well, if you look at the word perfection, which in Sanskrit, and Geshe said this explanation of it in Sanskrit comes from Tsongkhapa's um, clarifying the intent, one of his treatises on the Middle Way. And Tsongkhapa says that the word can be broken up into para and ita, and that at some point the translators must have added this ma sound in between to make it param ita. So essentially, para or param refers to the far shore, right? The far side. And ita means to have gone. So to have gone to the far shore of Buddhahood in this case. So generosity, for example, is something that hearers and solitary realizes and ourselves too can practice. But we lack the perfection of generosity. So the practice of the perfection of generosity, for example, is at the time that you practice generosity, that act is conjoined with the mind of bodhicitta, or you could say it the other way around. Um, your mind of bodhicitta is directly con or explicitly conjoined uh, with this act. So, for example, hearers and solitary realizers have a practice of generosity, but their generosity is obviously not conjoined with this thought of bodhicitta, is it? So the acts of generosity themselves are giving dharma, giving material goods, and giving protection from fear. Really, what is meant by generosity is a mind of giving, right? It's not referring necessarily to physical acts. Generosity is simply the mind of giving. And not only that, the mind of giving that is not tainted with miserliness, that is not stained with attachment, right? That is what we're referring to when we say generosity. The opposite of generosity is miserliness, right? When we give, our giving is tainted by miserliness. A bodhisattva gives wholeheartedly. They give their body, their possessions, and their roots of virtue. We, on the other hand, we really have to think about it before we give, right? We really have to reason ourselves into whether it's the right idea or not. And then we think about the amount, what's the right amount we should give. And then if we're giving an object, okay, I'm going to keep the good one, but I'll give away the bad one. If we're giving cash, we'll keep the newer notes and give away the old crinkled notes. So this is generosity that is impure, right? And it stems from an impure motivation. It helps the other person, right? It helps the recipient, but it doesn't help you to accumulate waves of virtue, does it? Practice of generosity is incredibly important. And in the sutras, the Buddha taught two pithy lines that said, from generosity comes resources, and from guarding of ethics comes happiness. So in this life, our current situation of not having much problem with acquiring food, housing, and having enough wealth to get by, right? Not being super poor and destitute is the result of our actions of generosity in our previous lives. Although as beginners, we may find it extremely difficult to give away our body, all our possessions, and all our roots of virtue, even if we give away a single dollar, if we can qualify that act with the thought, may giving away this single dollar become a root of virtue for achieving Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, that is a practice of generosity, right? That is a practice of generosity that does give rise to strong roots of virtue. So what is the object or objects of our generosity, right? The recipients are the three jewels or sentient beings. So we can make offerings to the three jewels in the forms of prostrations, offering mandalas, right? And, water, flower, and so forth. And these are objects that we offer out of faith and devotion. And when we do so, we do accumulate great waves of merit. For example, if you perform a puja, during the puja, you should reduce your attitude of miserliness. And then when you perform the acts of worship and generosity, they become roots of virtues for achieving Buddhahood, right? When they're not tainted with wrong thoughts. And this is taught in both the Kangyo and the Dengyo, right? The sutras and their commentaries. Think of hungry ghosts or pretas, for example, right? In their past lives, they may have been incredibly wealthy. However, they were overcome with miserliness in a past life that prevented them from giving away their wealth to others, even to their relatives. And upon dying, that becomes, they get reborn as a hungry ghost. There's a famous story of a preta. In Tibetan, the name is Jogima. So this hungry ghost called Jogima, I'm not sure of the original Sanskrit name, essentially denied an extremely thirsty person water in their previous life, right? Not only did he deny this person who was begging for water, but he stopped other people from giving that person water as well. So this horrible act of miserliness ripened such that when he was reborn as a preta, he could not find a single drop of water in that lifetime. When you engage in giving, it's important to have the correct motivation. You shouldn't give with the thought, I hope I get something back, nor should you give with the thought, I hope people praise me for my kind act of generosity, right? If you do so with those thoughts, your act does not become a practice of generosity. So therefore, wherever you go, if you carry with you this motivation to give and your giving is not tainted with attachment or miserliness, and better yet, is conjoined with the attitude of bodhicitta, then your giving becomes a cause for Buddhahood. And through your giving, you accumulate waves of merit.
음.
Okay.
아, 타고도 대화다 탈빛 대화 싸움은 되는데 지바 땅에 들어 같이 땜마오 지마스러워.
Okay, so Geshe is explaining the types of generosity that Chandrakirti explained in his Entering the Middle Way. And I haven't studied this text extensively, so I'm not picking up the terms in Tibetan. So I don't know what the first type is called. I'll check later. But essentially, it's generosity performed with the hope or the thought of, through this may I experience the bliss of liberation, right? So it's not a high level of attitude behind it. So, for example, the generosity of hearers and solitary realizers, when they perform acts of generosity, they're hoping that it becomes a cause for the bliss of liberation. Of course, that's their goal. Or, for example, us in this life, not poorly motivated, right? But not motivated with the highest motivation of Buddhahood. Instead, thinking when you give something, they don't have to give back to me, not caring about the return. So this is the first type of generosity. The second type explained by Chandrakirti pertains to the generosity of bodhisattvas. So if we take, for example, bodhisattvas on the path of accumulation and preparation, although they may give their body, their possessions, and their roots of virtue, they're not necessarily ready to handle the effects of giving away their body. So they undergo great pain in doing so. But they can handle it. They can tolerate it because they have great compassion. So they're able to do so, but still with some pain. Once bodhisattvas reach the first ground, they no longer have this physical pain from giving away their body, and so they can do so. And so for them, this refers to the generosity of body, possessions, and roots of virtue without any pain or suffering. You may have heard of the story of the Buddha in one of his previous lifetimes where he gave away his body to the tigress who was starving and needed to feed her cubs. So it is said that when the Buddha in that lifetime, right, before he achieved enlightenment, gave his body to the tigress, he perfected generosity. So he achieved the perfection of generosity. So the generosity of possessions is something that we can conceive of and engage in, right? That's something we're able to do. The giving of one's roots of virtue is actually something we practice during our giving and taking meditation, right, of Tonglen, right, which utilizes love and compassion to both give and take. And in that practice, you visualize giving your roots of virtue. One also needs to take into consideration the recipient of your generosity. You can't just give anything to anyone, right? You need to think if it's appropriate. For example, a fully ordained monk can't just give away his robes and his begging bowl to a layperson, right? That's inappropriate. And likewise, a layperson shouldn't offer dinner to monastics. And this is more referring to the time of the Buddha when monastics did not at all engage in eating after noon, right? So through giving inappropriately, right, to the wrong person in the wrong manner, we actually are at risk of accumulating misdeeds rather than virtue. So in the great treatise of the stages of the path, it goes extensively through generosity and talks about generosity that fulfills a purpose or does not fulfill a purpose or is made at the wrong time and so forth. So with respect to actually fulfilling the purpose of generosity, it uses the example of a Brahmin, right? Brahmins engage in a sattvic diet. They don't eat onion and garlic or very pungent foods. So if you offer pungent foods like onion and garlic to a Brahmin, they can't even use them. So you haven't fulfilled the purpose of generosity. So inappropriate items also include weapons, right? Giving things that someone might use to harm another, right? Swords, guns, etc. So if we went through all the types of appropriate and inappropriate acts of generosity, we would never end. So we're going to return to Essence of Refined Gold and read down. So the outline now is how to train in the perfection of generosity. It says, based on the motivation to attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings, practice the following. Number one, giving correct teachings to those destitute of Dharma instructions. So most importantly, it starts by saying, conjoined with an attitude of bodhicitta, right? So always keeping this in mind, whether you're practicing generosity or ethics, they should be conjoined with bodhicitta. So giving correct teachings is the generosity of Dharma, and this is the supreme generosity. So if you think of some destitute person who really has a desire to practice Dharma, right? They genuinely wish to practice it, but they have no one to explain Dharma to them. If you were to explain even a four-lined verse, it would be a cause for Buddhahood, and this is said to be why the generosity of Dharma is supreme. So number two is giving protection to those oppressed by the wrath of kings, soldiers, etc., those frightened by sentient beings such as spirits, demons, wild animals, and snakes, and those frightened by inanimate forces such as burning, crushing, drowning, and suffocation. So you're essentially giving fearlessness to sentient beings. For example, in the old times where kings ruled the land, sometimes the kings could be incredibly cruel and dish out unjust punishment, right? And rather cruel punishments. And moreover, people would be trapped inside prisons, and inside the prison, of course, you're afraid of your other inmates, so you're in a horrible situation and not necessarily in there for a just reason. So with a good motivation, if you were to free such a person from prison in this situation, that would be an example of giving fearlessness, right? Or giving protection to those oppressed by the wrath of a king. Freeing from the danger of spirits, demons, wild animals, and snakes and so forth. It's clearly explained here. And those frightened by inanimate forces refers to things like floods, earthquakes, and so forth, right? Who are badly affected by the elements. So offering protection from those disasters. And of course, again, these acts should be conjoined with bodhicitta. The last in the list is giving food, drink, healing medicine, and so forth to those in need. So what does it mean to be in need? Well, looking at the situation in Singapore, it's very difficult to find people in need, right? This country is incredible in terms of its infrastructure, and the state that the people live in is also absolutely wonderful. And this is certainly due to everybody's merit accumulated in their past lives. So instead, if we look to a country like India, although great in its population, has a level of poverty wherein people are thinking how they're going to get their next meal, right? And they just survive day to day. So some of them, even if they are sick, it's very hard for them to get help or any medicine. And you've all seen it. You know about it, right? We're aware. So seeing this type of suffering and neediness, if you give in order to help ease their suffering, this is certainly true and real generosity that counts. So this is certainly due to the actions of our past lives, right? Whether you become poor or whether you become rich in your lifetime. Richness is a ripening of meritorious actions, and poverty is the result of your karma and afflictions accumulated in your past life. So it's said that projecting karma projects the rebirth, completing karma is filled out, right? Fills out the details of your life. So, for example, you might accumulate projecting karma and achieve a human rebirth. But through non-virtuous actions you committed in your past life, that completing karma fills in your situation, right? Creates your situation in this life, which can be poverty. For example, you got your human rebirth through guarding ethics, but your poverty is due to not engaging in generosity. So that was an example of virtuous propelling karma and non-virtuous completing karma. There are also examples of the opposite. So non-virtuous propelling or projecting karma and virtuous completing karma. For example, a rich Naga. Birth as a Naga is not propelled by virtuous projecting karma. It's propelled by non-virtuous projecting karma because a Naga is considered an animal rebirth, right? But still in such a rebirth, there are certain Nagas who have great wealth, right? And you may have heard about them, right? Have all sorts of jewels and riches. Or, for example, you can think of a dog in Singapore. Right? Some people treat their dogs like human beings. This is a level of comfort for animals that is rarely seen in the world, especially in some parts. So that dog, because it is a dog, was propelled to that rebirth through non-virtuous propelling karma. But due to some small acts of virtue in its previous life, which act as completing karma, it doesn't suffer in this lifetime. It never wants for food or drink. It's always satisfied. It's treated well, never beaten. So these situations can happen. They can happen to us as well, depending on what we do in this life, right? The same can occur in our next life. So this section concludes with the statement, in brief, with a heart with a free heart, give your body possessions and your merit of the past, present, and future in order to attain enlightenment for the good of the world. So it's very easy to say that, but to really be able to give these three, your body, your possessions, and your roots of virtue of the past, present, and future, for the sake of all beings, is something that can only be done by bodhisattvas who dwell on the grounds, right? The first ground and upwards. And even then, it gets easier as you progress along those grounds. So the main points to take away from this class are that generosity is a mind of giving, right? It's an attitude. And at best, or well, fundamentally, this mind of giving should be without miserliness and without attachment, right? It shouldn't be sullied by those attitudes. And whatever generosity you perform, right, even prostrations and such acts of worship can become generosity, or whether we're talking about giving an object and so forth. Do it without miserliness. And at best, it should be qualified with bodhicitta, right? Because when it's qualified with bodhicitta, then that act of generosity becomes a cause for Buddhahood. So that's ideal. However, even if you don't perform generosity with a mind of bodhicitta, if you merely do it with a wish to help the other recipient, right, with no thought of return and so on and so forth, you still accumulate waves of roots of virtues. So it's still a good thing. So in brief, if I were to summarize generosity, it would be to perform it without miserliness at the very least. Geshe said, I thought that we might meditate a little bit during this class, but we've run out of time.